Hello and welcome to the Beneverse Movie Channel. We have a special episode today. I am joined by the filmmakers and producer of the film Ben and Lacy. I have Michael Shacket and Morgan Overley on my show today. How are you guys doing?
Hey Ben, doing great. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. We're focusing in on your guys' film, Ben and Lacy, which I'll let you guys kind of more introduce it, but it's going to be a topic on this film and also just a broader discussion on Gen Z itself and specifically Gen Z in filmmaking. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. I've written and discussed this topic in length, so it's going to be fun to kind of just discuss it with other people. But let's just start with let's start with both of you, just kind of in your own words each. Like, how do you describe Ben and Lacy?
Hmm. Ben and Lacy is, like you said, it's a Gen Z centric, Gen Z themed film. Myself as a Gen Z filmmaker, I felt like um there was an empty pocket of cinema that I'd never really seen before represent my generation like uh I had experienced it. Um I felt like you know, growing up watching films and growing up watching YouTube content and new media, and being one of the first, pretty much the first generation to not even know what life is like without the internet. Ben and Lacy is kind of the attempt I have at bridging the gap between the cinephiles and the social media influencers. Ben and Lacy is a love story that takes place through the first person perspectives of two different people's perspectives, both sides of a romantic partnership, and specifically a very young romantic partnership. And the vlog kind of objectively shows both sides of that relationship, and the good and the bad.
And Morgan, what
Yeah.
about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that Ben and Lacy is kind of this timeless coming of age love story that everybody can relate to, that excitement of young love and finding your way in the world and your passions in life, with that added element of technology, like Michael said, and just the specific time that we're in, whether it be dealing with cameras and blogging and cell phones and like all sorts of different kind of relationships that come with technology. But it's kind of both modern and timeless.
And I'll just kind of to get an idea of not only what Ben and Lacy is, but also kind of the inception on it. Michael, you being the director of this film, I just kind of want to hear not even necessarily what inspired this story, but what what was the inception of Ben and Lacy?
Yeah, sure. The Inception started with the relationship. It started with the love story. I've for as long as I can remember, a little quick backstory on my situation. The I didn't grow up with, two parents being married and in love and all that stuff. Parents were never really together. We just kind of raised my sister and I as one nuclear family, but more as like, roommates. There was no real like romantic relationship that I saw growing up. So for my entire life, I've always been really kind of interested in romance, and romance turned into kind of my favorite genre of films, just because I had this curiosity with what people considered to be normal relationships. So I thought about this idea in this story of two people who get into a relationship, fall in love, and then the conflict of cheating, adultery in the middle of it, and what that kind of does to people. Because in so many films and stories, I've always heard people talk about why it's so bad and why it's you need to stay loyal and all these things. And I accepted it, but truthfully, I didn't really understand it. I didn't understand what that had to do with love. I always grew up thinking love was just an emotion outside of anything we did physically. So I came up with that idea, and but I really wanted to write that story from each person's perspective equally. And I struggled for a while to figure out how to do that. I played with so many different concepts of narrators telling a story multiple times in the same thing. I put together a treatment for like a time travel movie at one point because I was like, maybe this will work or something will come from it. But I couldn't figure it out. So for a long time, the story was just kind of shelved, and I moved on to other projects. But then I was walking down Fairfax in Los Angeles, and I see this dude holding a camera, talking to it, and he was just going on and on and on, and I was enamored by it. I thought this is the most interesting thing I'd ever seen, and I ended up walking in the background of it. Because I walked through it, I kind of felt like I was like, I probably have the right to like go up and ask him about it. So I went up to him and I asked him, I was like, what are you doing? And the thing that like shocked me is as soon as he put his camera down, he totally changed his entire demeanor. He went from being real bubbly and real like, outgoing to just like real socially anxious immediately. I ended up getting his information, saw his YouTube channel, saw all the things that he was doing on his channel. And I was like, this is so different than the person that I was speaking to in real life, that I went down this rabbit hole of watching like lifestyle vlogs and of all different kinds. And then after a while it hit me, this is the way I can tell this story, because this is the most objective way anybody can express themselves, is by just directly talking to a camera. And then just all the other nuances of the film kind of came out of that, of watching the way different people vlogged and the different creative styles people had with it. Some people were more cinematic, some people were more, straightforward. Some people kind of like aggressively tore down the facade of being like a perfect person, but almost to the degree where it almost still felt disingenuous. And after that, I mean, the whole story in the film just came right out of me in a matter of weeks, honestly.
Morgan, what about for you? What was your, not even necessarily inception of this story, but what was your kind of beginning involvement in this as the role of a producer on this film?
Yeah, so basically, Michael had this idea for this feature, and I thought it was fantastic. He sent me the script. I loved it. I love that it's a film about filmmaking. I think that's really fascinating. And I really love that entire storyline, and how the second half of the movie, the movie is kind of split into two parts in a way, and each character does get their perspective told. And I don't want to like give too much away if people haven't seen it yet. I read the script. I thought it was fantastic. I loved the female perspective on it. It was something really, really unique and something I haven't really read before. And so essentially I was like, whatever you need, I will do anything to be a part of this to any capacity. And I had not really yet produced. And so that was a really wonderful experience for me, getting to kind of like help make the schedule. We figured out how we were going to shoot everything, budget everything, how we were going to do wardrobe, makeup, on a indie budget. So yeah, it was excellent. I was just so proud to be a part of it in any way.
Morgan, I think my follow-up question is for you, and it's this idea of Gen Z growing up. I think is kind of a aspect of Ben and Lacy that's very much explored in this movie. And, I just kind of wanted to get your perspective as someone producing this film and getting involved in it all. How did that change your relationship with Generation Z?
Ooh, this is an interesting question because I'm right on this borderline cusp. So I am like an elder Z, or like a very, very young millennial, possible. Like, I think I read somewhere that cutoff is like 95, and I was born at the end of 94. So yeah, I mean, I also saw early YouTube, early age of the internet, when it was basically the Wild West out there, and how it's turned into all of these styles of vlogs, kind of like Michael was talking about. And it does create these layers. Like you really can make a movie about making a movie about vloggers also vlogging. So it kind of is like this movie Inception, and how we're all using a camera to tell these stories. And I think that's something very unique to Gen Z and to the young millennials, and even some of the older millennials as well. Just being able to actually utilize that technology for yourself and not having to get people's permission to make the movies that you want to make or the content that you want to make. I might be going off the question. Basically, as far as I guess Gen Z and filmmaking, we're kind of the newest ones on the block. We're kind of coming into this age now, being in our 20s, where we're starting to get movies made and make our own projects. And I think we're starting to see all of those things that we've grown up understanding and knowing, the very specific brand of humor, the clothes, the style, really starting to come to life in cinema at large, and everybody is starting to notice. So here we are.
Yeah, no, because I fall in that same category as well, where I'm 1998, but like January of 1998. So I'm like, the cutoff is like, it's still in question. And I tried doing research on it today. The general years that I've heard is like somewhere between 1996 to 2012. I don't know. I've seen like some people who put the years earlier or later. It's somewhere in this weird middle ground. But you hit on this point that I find so fascinating, which is it is easier than ever to make a film to some degree, at least in the ability to shoot something. Like we have cameras on our phones that can take quality video. And so, Michael, I'm sure for you, that must have been something exciting as someone who I'm guessing is approximately my age as well. I'm 25. Like growing up being film fans, at least in the case of myself, like I grew up listening to all the audio commentaries, the behind the scenes commentaries, listening to how they would make these movies. And now you have the tools to make those same movies with a little bit more of ease. Did that give you a level of freedom that excited you, or did it make it even possibly like a little bit harder to get the ball rolling to some degree because you just had so much access?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like you kind of nailed it when you said it's kind of both good and bad. The great parts of it are obviously the immense freedom as an artist that it gives you to be able to just take anything, take any, story that you have, and you can just put it out there. You can go film it, and you can film it. We've always, there's the idea that we have the phones in our pockets, and we can now make anything at any time. We've kind of always been able to do that. It's just been at a much lower quality in the past when you've had the Super 8s and all that kind of stuff. Now we have really beneficial, we have really good quality equipment to use. You can use the phone, but you could also use the Canon T5i, the Rebel T5i. That was the first camera I ever started using, and that was like a $300 camera. And you put a nice lens on that, it can rival anything that was shot in the 2000s. So that freedom, and especially the style that we shot in, that I didn't even need cameramen. I didn't need, boom operators. I didn't need a lot of things. I'd say half, if not most of the movie was just Morgan and I, just like running around everywhere, holding the camera that we were using to make everything. The microphone was on top of the camera for most of the movie. At some points we took it off and kind of placed it in certain places, but that freedom allowed us so much space to work with those characters and work with the world too, because it allowed me and then the bad side to it was that I didn't have the all the available creative editing tools, I guess. Like I wasn't able to cut and get coverage and that kind of thing. I've always come from traditional filmmaking, so I've always done the almost TV style coverage where you're just getting, a wide, some medium, some close-ups, maybe a couple inserts, but I couldn't get all that coverage. We had to basically shoot one scene with one camera angle, which one allowed us a lot of freedom to really explore the acting part of it. And we were able to, play these scenes out much longer than if I was directing something, traditionally. But what that did was everything had to be perfect, in each take. Everything had to be there couldn't be a light out of place. There couldn't be a piece of set dressing out of place. But that limitation allowed me as a filmmaker to explore things that I had never really explored before. For example, Morgan brought up the wardrobe. The wardrobe was one of my favorite parts about this film because a lot of the film, Ben is off screen for half of the film, and he has a big arc while he's off screen. I thought, how do I show these things without being able to get all this different coverage? And the wardrobe was one of those identifying features that I realized, well, if I write the wardrobe into the script, then we can explore how they evolve via their wardrobe. But the thing I'm most proud of with the film in general is that even though it was shot on this indie budget, and we kind of utilized the access that we had to all this really nice equipment for not a ton of money, I think narratively, the story that I wrote in the screenplay that I wrote, if somebody were to have given me $10 million to make it, I don't know if I would have made it differently. I think I would have stuck to the way we made it, because I think that's what the story called for.
Morgan, what about for you when you're helping make this film, when you're producing this film? What was something that you just either were surprised with in learning about filmmaking, or just a moment for you that was just like kind of groundbreaking in the way that it shifted perspective on how you understood the film industry to work?
Oh man. I mean, yeah, it's kind of, what we've been talking about. It's, people will say, oh, you can, there's no excuse to not be making your own stuff. You can make it on an iPhone. You can make it on an iPhone. And still I would be like, oh, I don't have this, or I don't have that, or I need this, or I need that. And, luckily I have Michael, and Michael takes so much initiative, so creative. And he was like, no, we don't need a lot of equipment. We don't need a lot of money. You can make a great film with very few resources because of the time period that we're living in, especially. You really can shoot a movie on an iPhone. And that was really groundbreaking for me because, yeah, I don't know. I think there's always kind of these excuses why, yeah, you can't start something or make something, but it's amazing what can be done with a little bit of creativity and with a really good story. If the writing is there and you capture it, I mean, that's really filmmaking. If the writing is there, you capture it, and it's real, then you have a movie. And that has really opened my eyes to filmmaking, and really kind of like set me off on this journey of making more films myself and getting into directing and continuing producing. And so, yeah, really opened my eyes.
What was the, not necessarily moment for you, but when did it become kind of real to you? Like, oh, this story is actually clicking. We have something special here. Like, what was that? Like, that has to be kind of a surreal feeling to just be like, oh, this is actually like happening, and it's happening in a real, tangible way that I can take pride in.
Yes. Okay. We filmed this one scene. We filmed this on top of like the Burbank Mall, and it's there when they have their first kiss. And I think we did it in one take. Isn't that right, Michael? One take?
Right. Yeah. And that was
Yeah.
a scene that I was insanely nervous about because I didn't think we'd be able to get it. And it was so late already.
Yeah. We got up there. It was late. We were tired. We were like, all right, let's just go for it. And it was just me and Michael working together, doing the entire thing. And we shot it, and we were like, did we just kill that? Is that the take? That's the take. And it just felt so real and so natural. And like, Ben and Lacy's chemistry, I was like, oh, this is good. This is real. And then Michael found this really excellent composer, I think out of Austin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Patrick Quinn.
Oh my gosh, the music he made for the movie just completely elevated it. And when Michael was showing me this music and the scenes that we had shot, that was kind of this moment for me where I was like, this is really something. And music, I think, is just so important. And I mean, Michael, you couldn't have found somebody better for the music of the film. So yeah, the first is just like in real love, just like falling in love with filmmaking, falling in love with each other. It was that fireworks moment.
What about for you, Michael? Was it those same moments? Did you have another like moment in your doing this that you felt that?
I mean, as a writer and as a filmmaker, it kind of feels real and as soon as you set a date, like while you're writing it on the page, it always feels real in your head and you feel very connected to it. There's scripts that no one has ever seen and no one will ever see that I still feel those characters are almost real. But it's not, I didn't feel like we were really going towards it until we had really set the date. And funny enough, I was actually living in Austin, Texas at the time. And I reached out to Morgan, who was in California at the time. And it was kind of a wild request to even reach out to her to do this project because I didn't really know logistically how I was going to feasibly do everything because I wasn't even in the state and I didn't have a residence there or anything. But it was really as soon as we landed and we got into the house that ended up being Lacy's apartment in the film, and Morgan came over, and it was the first time I think because that was a little bit after the or maybe it was during the pandemic. It was after lockdown. But I don't think Morgan and I had even seen each other in person for a year or two, maybe at that point. So it all kind of felt like a fever dream that I was like really shooting for the stars at some point. And then as soon as Morgan like walked through the door and we sat down, and for me, honestly, we did a table read. And as soon as we did the table read, I was like, I think this is going to be something special. And I think it feels real.
So, and just to say, this film is extremely special. I think it is amazingly authentic in a lot of just scenes. There are some very relatable moments, and that's also got to be a weird thing for you to kind of film to a degree where it's just like, oh, this is so relatable, and it's maybe a part that like, how relatable am I allowing it to be? Is there ever that kind of fear in that where you're just like, maybe I'm like putting too much of my soul out right here?
I think you ask any artist that, they're gonna say, I always, you put everything that is you into this project. This Ben and Lacy is, I always tell people that I have, it's not the easiest for me to express my feelings and my thoughts through words all the time. But you watch any film I've ever made, and that's my brain on a canvas. Everything in this film for me was very, very. I mean, it was so relatable. I feel like I really did just come from me and through a lot of my thoughts and a lot of my journeys through life. Everywhere, for everything from the actual, romance and the friendships and the relationships that people have with each other in the film, all the way to literally Lacy's exploration as a filmmaker. Her entire timeline of how she became a filmmaker parallels mine almost exactly. So I don't know if I ever felt like I was putting too much of my own soul into the film. In fact, I kind of sometimes think I should have put more into it. I think sometimes I kind of let myself be attracted to the mainstream, as it would be, in terms of some of the scenes and some of the romance involved. But so yeah, I don't know. No, not really. I don't know if I feel like I put too much into it. I feel like I deeply love it, and I feel proud of it.
let's focus on, I guess, the Gen Z aspect of this movie, and that will kind of what's it called, that will bring us to the next portion
Segue.
of this segue. There we go. Segue. That was the word I was looking for. Segue into our next conversation. So I have this question for you both. In your own words, what does it mean to be Gen Z?
Morgan and I had the same face.
Yeah, I didn't prep you for that question. I'm like, I
that
gotta
was
get the authentic reaction.
yeah.
Live
Oh
on air.
man,
Not live, but
what does it mean? Yeah, basically live, pre-recorded
live
live. um, man, what does it mean to be Gen Z? I think one of the best. I mean, it's kind of like dreary a little bit, but one of the best phrases I ever heard to describe Gen Z as was Gen Z woke up in a room with a ticking time bomb. And I feel that very deeply as a Gen Z person. I I also, I mean, I think that sums it up pretty well. I also think it's pretty important to note that it's Gen Z is the first generation to grow up without knowing what life was like before the internet. I've never used a payphone, never used a pager, never used any of these things. I've only ever, I've always been able to email or text or anything like that. And social media has been a very large part of my life since very, very probably too young. So I don't know if that even answers the question. Morgan, you go.
I think you're getting at the core of Gen Z. So, and Morgan, I kind of want to ask you the same question, which is essentially, what does it mean? And I think there's Michael, there's a point of which you hit that I find so fascinating that we'll talk about in a second, but it's this idea of the ticking time bomb. Morgan, would you agree with what Michael said, or do you see it a little differently?
Yes, I fully agree. Gen Z, I think, is really upending a lot of things we've just accepted as a society to be true. And I think that is because of the ticking time bomb. I think we've grown up in a super sensationalist, globalized world. Everything feels like it is impending doom to some extent. And we also are just able to communicate in ways globally that we have not been able to communicate in the past. And so I think every new generation brings with it their own flavor, their own style. But Gen Z is particularly special in that we are dealing with, whether it be technology, AI, politics the way that they are, I think we're dealing with things that are completely unique in history, completely unique in history. And Gen Z is starting to come along and say, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing this way? Can this be like this? Should this be like this? And they're very creative and they're very nihilist. I guess including myself, although technically you outed me as like a very young millennial. But I'm an elder Z, so I'll take elder Z. But it's extremely unique. I mean, yeah.
I think the reason I wanted to like start with this question is because we're in such a weird period right now where Gen Z filmmaking is really starting to kickstart it in a way that maybe we hadn't seen it 2 years ago. Like, if you look at the number of films that have come out in the past year versus the year before, like, it's almost doubled what would be kind of considered a Gen Z film to a degree. And that's where I really want to focus on, because I'm sure making Ben and Lacy, you guys studied other Gen Z films or films that you felt like could relate this subject matter in a cinematic form. And I guess that was kind of the question and the exercise that I wanted to do today, which was essentially, as I call it, the top 5 Gen Z films. But I guess before we even get into that, I guess it's important to quantify what exactly makes a Gen Z film. So if you guys are up for it, what I wanted to do is kind of do a round robin where it's just like, this is a characteristic of a Gen Z film or a quality of a Gen Z film. And we kind of just keep going back and forth. We can piggyback however we want to do it for a few minutes. And then that's kind of how we can just broadly describe the subject matter that we're focusing on for the next handful of minutes. So I can start. I'll give out my first one because I know you guys have done a lot of talking and I have not. So let me start with the first point that I wrote down. I was really trying to focus it up on my thoughts of it. And one of the aspects that I find so fascinating about Gen Z, and it's Michael, you kind of touched on this, is there's this kind of panic drivenness to Gen Z stories. And I think that comes from kind of the political climate we exist. Like, if you look at a lot of the films that we'll be talking about, they largely focus on gun violence. They largely focus on the environment, Black Lives Matter, gay rights. They're usually pretty anxiety driven. And I think anxiety is a big discussion point in talking about Gen Z movie making, because I feel like in all the films that we'll hit on today, anxiety will play a pretty strong role in it. So that's my first point that I want to throw out. Michael,
Yeah.
I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I think that's I think that was a great explanation of Gen Z culture in general. To take it in a little slightly a different direction, more about like almost in a as far as like comedy goes, I kind of like to touch on and I guess just genuine like realness of the generation is feel like, and I'm sure both of you agree with this, I've seen lots of Gen Z characters and Gen Z stories on TV and film that don't necessarily actually feel like Gen Z characters. The vocabulary, the language we use, the mannerisms of like, you know, the just impulse to irony for almost every situation. But the idea that the irony is an assault on somebody else, that is just not the case. It's almost more of a defense mechanism based on the anxiety that we've constantly been feeling. I feel like this generation grew up really quickly. And I feel like the comedy that we use, the irony that we use, is just a way of it's another way of expressing ourselves without having to outright be genuine. But at the same time, it's very genuine how we speak about a lot of these things. I think that always makes a really good Gen Z movie, is if you can be really honest about the how people feel and how they express how they feel. One of the movies I have on my list is I'll touch on that when I talk about it, but they express what the characters express themselves really accurately, and I think really in a unique way through their ironic takes on awful things that happen.
I think you just hit the nail on the head of a point that I was also had written down, which is these films are typically have a sense of comedy to them. Like, there is almost an aspect of the world is such disastrous that the only thing we can do is kind of laugh. And yeah. I think meme culture has really been kind of a Gen Z defining point. Morgan, what about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's this sense of camp. It's this very camp horror, I think, is actually really, really in right now. A lot of the movies that are coming out right now, even though they don't all accurately portray Gen Z, they're trying, and some of them, you know, hit the mark. But there is this sense of, like hilarious nihilism. It's like, I think of it, if you even think of, you know, the Super Mario Brother movie that just came out, you know, you have this little star who's just so dark, but it's so funny. It's just very, it's like you said, making light of the global challenges that we're facing. And, you know, it's very diverse too. I mean, we have all of this access to everybody around the globe. And so whether it be like fashion or jargon, or, you know, we are just in this time now where we can pull so many things from so many places. And it kind of ends up with this really fun mix of hilarious, horrifying camp.
You kind of hit on another point that I was really thinking about as well. There is just like we're kind of the generation that was distinctly post 9/11. Obviously, you know, we're born, for at least a handful of us, we're born pre 9/11, but there is this post 9/11 view on the world. Like, for instance, I don't remember going to an airport without security up and down. Like, I don't remember that experience. I don't really remember much of a pre 9/11 world. And then it's also a weird factor because I'm a little bit older, so I do remember a world, or at least I should say in America, that wasn't really, gun violence wasn't as big of a focus at schools as it has become. I grew up 3 years older than my sister, where we had lockdown drills. We never had what's it called? Gun lockdown drills. So I think that's another aspect of this to hit, which is, again, I think it goes into this hilarious nihilism that you're talking about. There is just this idea of it's so dark that at some point you have to laugh or you're going to go crazy. And I think that's what some of these films talk about really well. I want to really get to the discussion, so I'll throw out a few more just briefly and let me know if you guys agree or disagree. I think parental struggles has been a main focus, and that's probably generational. Every generation, especially coming of age films, have that element. I think another aspect of Gen Z is you typically see, I think one of the easiest factors that I think people identify it, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of them, is the stars are usually from shows like Euphoria, The Idol. I'm blanking on her name right now. Jenna Ortega, Rachel Sennett. Like, those are typically some of the big stars where I think that's how a lot of people view Gen Z, where it's like, oh, if Zendaya is in that movie, that automatically qualifies it to be Gen Z. I don't know if that's a correct qualification, but it's certainly, I think, a factor that we'll see in this list. And the last one is, what's really interesting is Gen Z is really largely on TV. You look at a lot of the big shows like Euphoria, American Vandal, Big Mouth, Generation, High School Musical, the musical, the series, The Idol, Miss Marvel, Outer Banks, Sex Education, Sex Lives with College Girls. Like, so much of it is on TV now. And that's why I also think this discussion of film is such an interesting one, because we're kind of seeing this counterbalance between the two. So I think the way we'll do this, if this works for you guys, is we each have 5 titles. We could have each other's titles on here. So I think let's just go kind of like, let's do one at a time, kind of just briefly. We have about 20 minutes to do this. So Morgan, I'll let you go first. What was your number 5?
Oh, my number 5. Okay. Yeah, I was checking to make sure I did this in order. My number 5 is Shiva Baby.
Okay. I have this at my number 6. This was just barely cut out of my list.
It's excellent.
It's excellent. We'll talk about Shiva Baby real quick, because I know this wasn't as big of a film. It became kind of a sensation, but it's very much an indie rooted film. So what do you love about Shiva Baby?
So Shiva Baby, my roommate, my best friend, convinced me to watch it. He's like, you have to see this movie. It's fantastic. And yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, it's Rachel Sennott, who you mentioned, and Molly Gordon. And it was a story of one day at a Shiva, which I don't know, I mean, a whole lot about Judaism, but is, I believe, like a funeral or memorial service. And it's this girl coming of age and basically what it kind of means to be a young adult and come back home to your family for this event. And, you know, she runs into a lot of people from her life in different capacities. And you find out all of these pieces of who she is throughout this day of her being at this event. So I loved the format. I thought a movie about just one entire day was such a smart way to tell a story. And the acting was excellent. I mean, it was really, really great.
Yeah, no, it's a really wonderful movie. I fully agree on those sentiments. Rachel Sennett, I think, has very much become a key in Gen Z storytelling. I mean, and I don't want to maybe step on anyone's toes, but I mean, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is another of her films. She just had a recent film, Bottoms, that released last weekend. That has been like, she does feel like a voice for Gen Z. Again, honorable mention for me. Michael, what about you? What's your number 5?
My number 5 is a pretty new movie. I think it might even still be in theaters some places. It's Talk to Me by Raka Raka, aka Michael and Danny Filippo. This is that movie. I was very lucky. I got to see that an early screening of that at South by Southwest this year with Danny and Michael. Absolutely loved this movie, and I'm not the biggest horror guy, but I absolutely loved Talk to Me. It's the reason I think it's such a great Gen Z film is its take on horror, because what has horror been for 50 years or 100 years even? It's been this genre where normal people are going through normal lives, and then all of a sudden some horrific thing happens to shake everything up, and then their lives change forever. The unique thing about Talk to Me is the horror element of it. They don't surprise you with it. It's just they introduce it as this is something that has been here for their entire lives, and these teenagers are using it as entertainment. They're not using it. They're not scared of this thing. They have rules in place that they're like, well, this could destroy our lives, and we could be terribly hurt by this, but this is just life. So we're gonna take it and make the best out of it. And then they start entertaining themselves with it. And then, of course, it takes a turn when somebody doesn't follow the rules exactly. And I just thought that I was like, I feel that as Gen Z.
This is such an annoying one that I haven't seen yet. I've had a few opportunities. I've been meaning to see it. I was out of town last week when I had the opportunities to see it for friends. I've been really excited to see Talk to Me. I just had a friend text me today, and he's like, this film is excellent. So I'm definitely like, this will be a movie that I see in theaters. I actually also had a recent release. I'm curious if either of you have seen it. It just released to Hulu, I think 2 or 3 days ago. It had a small theatrical run. It premiered at TIFF last year. It's How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Yes. Oh, that was my number 6.
Oh, was it your number 6? Okay,
loved that movie.
Shiva Baby and How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I watched them both today, and I ended up putting How to Blow Up a Pipeline at number 5. This film is exceptional from like beginning to end. It is a lean 100 minutes of just kind of meanness, of just like going for it. It's Ocean's 11, but environmental terrorism, essentially, as they kind of describe it in this movie. Like, it never concerns itself on are they doing the right thing? It is simply, we are in the procedure with them as they are trying to blow up a pipeline. And I believe it's West Texas, I believe is where the pipeline
is. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
This thing is thrilling. This is one of the most exciting films that I've seen. And I can't recommend How to Blow Up a Pipeline enough. And I don't want to spoil it much because it's such an experience to watch, but really it is just like, it goes in directions that I could have never predicted. So that's my number 5.
Fantastic choice. I loved that movie.
It's so good. Morgan, what is your number 4? And I'm curious, I feel like we're going to start getting some crossover really soon.
My number 4, I don't know how much, if it counts as Gen Z or not, I know it's very popular with Gen Z, is Megan. And I selected Megan because I think Megan is a really good example of this like camp horror. It's like this joke, and that's very in right now, like whether it's Megan or Cocaine Bear. Renfield was kind of like this as well. And of course, these filmmakers are not Gen Z, but these movies seem to be really in vogue right now. And it's this kind of like violent, nasty, silly technology takeover in a funny way. And I think it's basically everything we had been discussing. I think Megan it's a movie I didn't expect to, I'm not gonna say I didn't expect to like it, but I was like, I don't know. And I saw it and I was like, I really enjoyed Megan. I thought it was so funny. And yeah.
Yeah, that was, I think that definitely qualifies for the list. I wasn't as fond of this movie as other people were, although I do understand the camp appeal to it, and there are certainly some really funny scenes in it. Though I do agree, I do think this does fall directly in the conversation that we're having. Michael, what about you? What's your number 4?
Yeah, before I get to the number 4, I just wanted to mention one other honorable mention that I had, that I was thinking of Evil Dead Rise as well, because I loved that movie, and I loved the camp, and I thought all the Gen Z people I know love that movie. The only reason I didn't put it on there was because I'm like, it's very similar to the old Evil Dead as well. So I was like, it doesn't feel quite like a Gen Z movie. It just has a lot of elements of it. Okay, so my number 4 is actually another movie that I was lucky enough to see at a South by Southwest. It was Booksmart by Olivia Wilde. That
That's my number
movie,
4 as well.
that film is that's the one I rewatched today to prep for this, because that film I haven't seen it since I saw it in at South by. I also went to see Olivia Wilde speak at a keynote while I was there about the movie. It's so genuine and it's so real, and it just like hits every scene hits perfectly some sort of part of growing up. It's one of the best coming of age films I've ever seen. I've called it the Gen Z Dazed Confused. It's like
Yeah.
it's such a phenomenally done film. Every actor in it is an absolute star. Was Feinstein? I think that's her name. And then
Oh yes,
and then Caitlin Dever. And the guy, I don't know his name, Skylar something. He's like the rich kid in Booksmart, but he plays young Sean in my favorite show of all time, Psych. So I know, so I love him. But the whole movie was so fantastic. I still, every time I watch that scene at the beginning where she's in the bathroom hearing all the bullies talk, and she walks out confidently with this idea that, well, I'm gonna have a great life after this, and you guys peaked, and I'm gonna have this great life. And then all of them revealed that they also got into great schools, but they just enjoyed their time at high school as well. That hit me so hard, because I was that person who thought everyone else was stupid for wanting to do this and wanting to do that. And I was like, well, I'm focused on what I'm doing. And it wasn't until after I had gotten through all that I realized I could have probably been doing both the whole time.
I had it at number 4 as well. You hit on all the coming of age aspects of this movie that I think makes it wonderful. The comedy of this movie is exceptional. I will still contend that one of the hardest I've ever laughed in a theater is when Jason Sudeikis accidentally puts on the iPod in the car when he's Ubering them. I think that is one of the wildest, funniest scenes I've seen in a movie, period. I do love this film. I failed to mention Caitlin Dever earlier, and Billy Lord actually to some degree as well. I think they are another group that kind of belongs in that Zendaya, Sydney Sweeney, Rachel Sennett wave. Morgan, I believe you said, did you have this at your number 2?
Yeah, Booksmart was my number 2. Similar to Michael, it was a movie I watched and I almost was like I almost was like, I can't watch this because it was so accurate to my life that it was disturbing. I was the nerdiest girl in school. I worked so hard in school. High school was my everything, and I did not party, and I was very focused, and continuing to grow up, and then being like, I probably could have enjoyed myself a little more, and then watching this movie and those girls having that experience. Wow. And then also the soundtrack. Every song is so good in that movie.
So good.
Favorite songs, there's like Run the Jewels, there's Death Grips, and like, oh my god, the soundtrack is unreal. So it was my number 2. I think it's definitely a quintessential Gen Z story.
Absolutely fantastic.
I'm so in favor of Booksmart as well. I think it was such an incredible directorial debut. And I still have stock in Olivia Wilde simply because of that. Because Don't Worry, Darling maybe tested that stock, but I'm still all in because of just how incredible Booksmart was.
And I saw, when I said earlier, I saw her keynote speech when she made Booksmart. She's one of the smartest filmmakers I've ever heard speak. Honestly, I was blown away because I didn't have any expectations of when I saw the movie of if it was going to be good or not. And then after I saw the movie, I had to see the keynote because it was so fantastic. And then hearing everything she said about it, it was so eloquent and so well thought out. I was blown away. So I'm the same way. I'm a lifelong Olivia Wilde fan now.
I'm kind of all in on it because even with like Don't Worry, Darling, where I have issues with that film, the cinematic display on that film I think is still incredible, and I think her eye for attention and detail and just scale I think is kind of unmatched right now. So that's our number 4. Morgan, that's your number 2. That means I'll just jump into my number 3. I'm curious if we'll have it on the list. I put almost debating switching my 2 and 3, but I think I'm going to stick with the order that I have it in. I have Eighth Grade as my number 3. Bo Burnham's Eighth Grade. You said it's your number 1, Morgan?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, these top 3 for me are kind of all interchangeable. I think the aspect that makes Eighth Grade so special to me is the surprise, because obviously I knew who Bo Burnham was in 2018. I just didn't know he was capable of this. And since then, it's kind of just been, he does Promising Young Women, he does his comedy special in Lockdown. Like, this is kind of more of the aspect that Bo Burnham is so interested in. The ability to write an 8th grade girl and actually make it feel authentic is, I think, exceptional. I think what he does in this film is extremely powerful. It's one of my favorite father performances in a movie, period. I think the father in the final third of the film is just absolutely exceptional. Isla Fisher, I believe, is her name, who plays
Elsie Fisher.
Elsie Fisher. She's just absolutely wonderful. This film is both comedically rich, and it's also just has just this darkness to it that we've all talked about. Like, I think one of the best scenes in the film is the encounter in the car, where the fright in that, the tension in it. I just think it's exceptional filmmaking. Morgan, what do you love about 8th grade?
I love 8th grade because it's actually 8th grade. I haven't seen a movie. I mean, look, Euphoria is on my list. I'd be remiss if it wasn't. It's fantastic. But a lot of these actors are older and more glam and more mature, playing these high schoolers or sometimes even middle schoolers, and I think that's what we're used to. It's very Hollywood. But 8th grade is this girl who's actually so young, so raw. I just haven't seen. I mean, it was just so moving from start to finish, so relatable, all the things that she goes through. And yeah, I loved how raw and real it was, and that her performance was just unbelievable. And she really was an actual teenager going through teenager things, and that just kind of can't be replicated.
Yeah, no, there's something authentic about their performance and everything about this film. Michael, did you have it on your list?
I didn't, but I will say, and I'll tell you why, because I do have, and I'm maybe, if you're okay with it, I'll skip to it. My number 2 is also a Bo Burnham project, but it's not 8th grade. I didn't put 8th grade on here just because, and I think it's a phenomenal movie as well. But for my perspective on it, it felt to me more like a movie where a millennial was looking at Gen Z in a fish tank. Instead of, it didn't feel right to me. It didn't. I like I said, I love the movie. Everything you guys were saying was spot on. I think it's a phenomenally done film. But I would not really consider it, and I know it's like supposed to be the Gen Z film, but I wouldn't really consider it a Gen Z feeling film. It's more of a Gen Z looking film, but it feels like a millennial film to me. But if you're cool with it, my second was Inside by Bo Burnham. And that I can understand why, if some people may not agree with that, just because some people wouldn't even consider that a film. But to me, that was an absolutely phenomenal piece of art that that he made. And I think I wanted to skip to that because I think you can't really have a conversation talking about Gen Z art and culture without bringing up Bo Burnham at some point. I would go as far to say that I think there isn't a single artist that has had as much influence on Generation Z as Bo Burnham has. And for me, Inside was really the biggest representation of that, of how he made a film and how he made or I guess his comedy special. And everything involved with it, everything from the way the lighting techniques he was using and the projections, and that's all stuff that like Gen Z is currently developing in film school right now. The mirror shots, the wide angles, the cluttered production design, and then the songs too. The songs were about how the billionaires are taking over and the world's on fire and all these things are happening. And also I'm super depressed, and I can't think of anything that represents Gen Z better than that.
I debated with putting a comedy album on here, and the reason I didn't end up putting one on here, because I think you hit the head on the nail, which was just like, I think Bo Burnham is kind of one of the defining voices of it. I also thought John Mulaney was. It's just the issue of John Mulaney is older, but I did think Baby J was really incredible art making, and I think it actually does relate to a lot of the ideas that we're talking about. I didn't end up putting it on there, but I do like having Bo Burnham's insight on here. The more representation Burnham gets on this list, I think the better it is. Morgan, what was your number 3? Because we've done your 1 and 2 now, correct?
Yes, correct. And I kind of touched on my number 3. It's Euphoria. You have to mention it. Especially, I mean, really, I guess Euphoria season 1, I should clarify. I mean, it really, to me, is the most Gen Z to Gen Z. I mean, the thing is that, of course, like, these filmmakers are older, and that's going to be true, I think, for any of these projects, because Gen Z is still relatively young. We're mostly in our 20s, late teens kind of thing, if I'm not mistaken. And so we're definitely on the filmmaking scene, but it is still, you know, probably Sam Levinson's probably at least a millennial or Gen Xer. I'm not quite sure. But I think it really is the fashion, the music. It's got Sydney Sweeney. It's Zendaya. It's Alexa Demi. It's Hunter Schafer. It's all of these. I mean, really, Euphoria put these young actors big time on the map as these superstars. And I mean, I think if an alien were to come to Earth and be like, what is Gen Z? Then I'd say Euphoria season 1. It really has kind of like set the tone, I think, for all projects kind of coming after it in its own way. So had to mention it.
I've never actually seen Euphoria, so I can't speak of it much. I will admit, I just was like, I feel weird about not having Zendaya anywhere on my list, which, spoiler alert, I don't have her anywhere. So I'm like, do I just put the Challengers trailer like on my number 5? Like, that could probably count. I didn't end up doing it, but I think I think you're completely right. Like, Euphoria seems like it's the defining piece of art in Generation Z. Like, I think in a 20 years, when we're looking back at it, it's going to be impossible to talk about Generation Z without talking about Euphoria and the stars that it makes, because Zendaya is one of the biggest stars in the world right now. So that was your number 3. And Michael, did we do your number 3?
No, I skipped it to number 2, but my number 3 is probably going to be controversial as well. But whatever. It's comment, it'll boost the engagement. My number 3
clipping this, by the way. Like, this is going to be the TikTok reel right now.
My number 3, and I cheated because I put 2 movies here, but it's the same filmmaker. It was 2 movies back to back, and I think the reasoning is the same. And hear me out, because it doesn't sound like Gen Z films, but my number 3 was Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story and White Noise. And the reason I have both of those on there is because I feel like it represents the anxiety and the reason for our anxiety. I think Marriage Story is a perfect representation of, I mean, Generation Z is, I don't know this for a fact, so someone could fact check me, but I'm pretty sure that Gen Z is the generation that has the most children of divorce out of any generation. I'd be confident to put money on it. I believe the divorce rate spiked when we were all like kids. So I think, or peaked, I should say. So Marriage Story, I think, is a perfect kind of like window into the Gen X that is most of our parents. Some of us have older parents, but most of our parents are going to be that Gen X, and seeing kind of what went through their mind and the chaos of what was going on during our childhoods. And on that same point, White Noise, which is a phenomenal movie. It's not Noah Baumbach's best movie necessarily. I've also heard the book is very good. I've never read the book though. But White Noise on Netflix is a film that perfectly encapsulates, I think, the ideas that Gen Z has had for a while, where lots of older generations will say, hey, this isn't that much of a problem, and I know that because I've had all these experiences. And Gen Z is the one saying, hey, your experiences don't necessarily matter in this case because this has never happened before. And Gen Z is the voice of that because Gen Z doesn't have that prior experience to inform this decision making. They only have what the science and the facts in front of us. So I think white noise, and specifically a lot, I mean, Adam Driver basically in both of those movies represents what I feel like caused the anxiety of this generation. That's my number 3. Went off the rails a little bit.
No, I like the pick, and I like the idea of the window of the generation that kind of raised us is such an interesting topic. In this, I struggled not having Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird on here. I just felt that it was technically for the generation before. So that's why I ended up not putting it on. I'm a Sacramento native, so like that one was one that I was really trying to get on, but ultimately could not do it. So that means at this moment, I haven't revealed my 1 and 2. Morgan, we revealed all of your 5, if I'm correct. And Michael, you have your number 1 that you haven't shared yet. So I'm curious if we have overlap here. I'll say my number 2 is Megan Park's The Fallout. This was a movie that came out to HBO year and a half ago, premiered at South by Southwest. It stars Jenna Ortega. This was the first time I had ever actually seen Jenna Ortega on screen. She plays a survivor of a school shooting. There's this other actress, I believe her name is Maddie Ziegler, who's in this film, and it's kind of their friendship coping post this, directed by actress Megan Park. I believe she's 36 years old, and it's just kind of an interesting, fascinating look into this horrible phenomenon that is going on currently in our school systems, and one that I just don't think gets enough attention. Being the son of parents who are both teachers, having a sister who works in education as well, this film just emotionally hit me. So that's why it's my number 2. I don't know if either of you have seen this film.
I've heard of it, but I have not been able to check it out yet.
Very much worth the watch. So, Michael, I'm going to let you present your number 1, and I'm curious if we have the same number 1.
I would be surprised, but maybe not. I'm curious. My number 1 is a bit more of a personal choice for me. And it may not make sense initially, but I'll explain it a little more. My number 1 Gen Z film is Sean Baker's The Florida Project. And the Florida Project. So backstory on me, I was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Didn't have like the most money in the world or anything. Very strange situation where like my dad lived on a sailboat and my mom was a struggling. She was a physician, which sounds like we'd be rolling in it, but like the truth is in Florida, especially in the early 2000s, physicians were not paid very well, and medical administrations were not treating them very well. And my mom was kind of constantly struggling. And we lived in a really small house and didn't have like the hurricane-proof windows or anything. So we were putting up the loud metal hurricane shutters and stuff where bricks would just like bash into them and terrify everybody in the house, or all the kids, at least me and my sister. And it was constantly weird. And then the 2008 housing crisis started in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And it was just all a really difficult situation, but me and my sister could not have told you that because we didn't notice at all. The innocence of being a child in that circumstance, especially when you had parents that were as phenomenal as mine were, we never even noticed that we were struggling with anything. We didn't notice that the world was ending all around us. Never noticed 9/11 happened. Never noticed that the housing market was crashing. We never noticed really any of these disasters that were happening around us. Plus, it's the same, and I think that's what the Florida Project, for me, it really, like, I can't watch that movie without just sobbing, just ugly sobbing, because I like watch my childhood again. And I remember being innocent and remember the blissful ignorance that I had back then of watching, live 30 minutes from South Beach and a few hour drive from Orlando. And it's literally the exact thing of like, being able to see the fireworks from outside of the park, and being so happy about that, because I never knew what it was like inside the park. So watching the fireworks from outside the park seemed like the best thing that could happen. I don't know, maybe that's not like necessarily Gen Z specific. Maybe it's more me specific.
I had it on the long list as well. Sean Baker's an incredible director. Defoe's performance in this movie is just exceptional. I actually prefer his follow-up project, Red Rocket, but
I haven't seen it.
Is exceptional filmmaking, which leaves, I guess, that's my number one. Which I was curious if this one was going to fall in on either of your guys' list. I didn't actually ever consider it a part of this like type of filmmaking that we're talking, but then when I saw it on other people's lists and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, of course, like this is very much clearly Gen Z filmmaking. And I'm like, well, at this case, then I'm going to have it at my number one because of the authenticity of this story and what it represents, and literally a childhood being looked at over, I think it's the span of 12 years.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
I just like Richard Linklater's Boyhood. It's kind of an exceptional thing to be the voice of a generation for decades. Obviously, he comes out of with Dazed and Confused. Some would even probably consider School of Rock kind of that, coming of age story for the early 2000s. And then like Booksmart, sorry, not Booksmart, sorry, I apologize. I was looking down at my list. And then Boyhood was like this film that explores my childhood. Like, I think I am the exact same age that the boy in Boyhood is, growing up, the scenes of like, anticipating the 7th Harry Potter book coming out in 2007. All these like little moments throughout, I just found such an authentic realization of growing up my age, which is such a hard thing to do. And I just think it's an exceptionally beautiful film. Have you guys seen Boyhood?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great pick too. That to be that age and to grow up exactly how he did, with all the different situations that happen with the divorce and the stepdads and all these different things. It's that's a great number one choice.
Yeah, no, I love it. And then we'll wrap up this conversation, but I did want to just give everyone the chance to just rattle off honorable mentions just real quick. Morgan, did you have any that were just like you wanted on this list but couldn't get it on?
I think for me, it is a lot of TV, like you were saying. I mean, the thing is that that's really, I think, so big with our generation, is kind of this age of television that really has come into its own. And so, of course, American Vandal is fantastic. It's so good. It's just the best. I'm kind of biased because I love the filmmakers, but yeah, just fantastic. There's actually a lot of animation that I think Gen Z loves animation. I think more than a lot of other kind of like more adult animation. Again, still kind of made by people who are a little bit older, but I think that kind of comedy has become really big with Gen Z. And just like handling a little bit more darkness than before, And I was thinking about it, and I think there's been so much darkness throughout all of human history and all these horrors, but we just weren't so aware. And with that awareness, it's a great thing, and it's also a very difficult thing to be seeing it from all over, just all of this footage, these things that are happening all over the planet. And so I think that reflects, there's a lot of darkness even in the animation. Yeah, Rick and Morty is really, really big, and I feel like kind of our generation loves that. And then South Park has been going for about 1,000,000 years, but they always do a really great job of, kind of having this little snapshot of the times that we're in. So yeah.
That's a good one.
In terms of animation, I can definitely tell you Into the Spider-Verse, I just really couldn't quantify it necessarily as fully Gen Z, but it is one of my favorite films of all time. So it was on the short list. Inside Out was also kind of in that conversation for me.
Yeah.
I just couldn't really know if I made the case as well as these other 5 films. I'm like, I don't know if the Gen Z-ness of it is so rooted in it. Michael, what about you? What are a few titles that you were like, this was on the list, didn't actually get on the final?
Yeah. Okay, well, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that was on my honorable mentions list. I tried to keep it short too. I was thinking of so many different things. One of my favorite films of all time, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Alfonso Gomez Rejon. So I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's so, so brilliant. It's not quite like exclusively a Generation Z film, but it's one of the greatest teen coming of age films that I've ever seen. And it's the same, it's like a comfort movie for me. So I love that one. Dope by Rick Famuyiwa. I think that's how you pronounce that too.
No, actually, I'm blanking on how you pronounce his name. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's all good. Dope. That's the movie. It's so, so great. And it represents the only, and it kind of like, I almost love how it initiates all the obsessions with 90s culture that a lot of Gen Z people do have. So love that movie. I also put Anish Chaganty's Searching. I thought that was it's obviously doesn't really, it has like one Gen Z character in it, maybe, but the whole thing taking place from a social media, or not social media, but from like a desktop platform and on the phone and the text messages and the social media.
Yes,
like that.
The mystery film.
Yes.
Are you referring to Searching or Missing?
Searching.
Okay,
That's
yeah, Searching is incredible.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal. I was so impressed, by the way, when I saw it, because I was not expecting anything with that style, and then it blew me away. In fact, to be honest with you, that movie is a huge influence on Ben and Lacy. That was the movie that I saw that I was like, oh, you know what? You can deviate from traditional filmmaking and still have a really incredible story in it, and incredible performances as well in that style. And then my last honorable mention, of course, Hereditary, Ari Aster.
Oh, interesting.
Such a good horror film. Amazing first feature. And I think it does represent, I do think it you know, might not be the best representation of Gen Z, which is why I didn't put it on the actual list. But it's just, I feel like it's too good of a film to even not put on here.
I had a few honorable mentions myself. I'll just breeze through them. I had Cha Cha Real Smooth was an honorable mention for me. I had the film The Edge of 17 was an honorable mention for me. I had Shiva Baby, as I mentioned. There was this movie with, blanking on her name right now, Zoe Dutch, I believe is her name, but Not Okay, which came out to Netflix last year, which is a really dark comedic look into some of the social anxiety and social media that we've talked about. And the last one, and I wanted to actually get just, if you guys actually thought it qualified, does Everything Everywhere All at Once count?
Ooh. Oh, that's such a tough one.
Everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
But it's tricky
because
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
think
she
is the age that we're talking about, but I just don't know if that's the focus of the film enough to really count. Which is why I didn't make the list.
I think it's more, I mean, to be honest, Everything Everywhere All at Once is almost too timeless, I feel like, to be categorized as a Gen Z film, because it's such an instant classic that I feel like you could put it in any time period and it would work. And I also agree. I think it's more the focus on the two older characters in it.
Yeah,
can't blank on their names.
The story of the parents, which is also why they put lockers on. Sorry, Morgan, what were you saying?
No, not at all. I think it is interesting though, because thinking about it, it is a really good example of the comedy that and the creativeness that we are really loving to see. It, and you know what is, I think with the rise of social media, and there's all of these layers of all of these lives that we live. There's the life we actually live. There's the life that we show that we live. There's the life we could be living. And Everything Everywhere All at Once kind of shows all of these iterations of a person's life and possibilities. And I think that that is very much a Gen Z theme of breaking the mold in all of these ways that your life could go, that you're hyper aware of because of technology and the way we can change our faces, our image, our, you know, whatever it is. And interestingly, I said animation earlier, and like, hear me out, but Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, is also kind of in this idea of having these different lives and these different possibilities, the ways that things can go. And that movie is just anxiety. It's all about anxiety. And your impending demise, which is very Gen Z. And so I think that that's just really the core right now. So Everything Everywhere All at Once, even though I agree with you, Michael, it focuses on the older couple and on the daughter. And I love that it has like the LGBTQ elements, which I think is another Gen Z staple. Thank goodness, very important. We're getting all of these different perspectives. But because it's tricky, because all of these filmmakers tend to be just a little bit older, but it is speaking to where we're heading, which is the undercurrent that is Gen Z, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No,
So
that totally makes sense. It's why I ended up I was thinking your logic as well, Morgan, which is why I didn't end up putting it on the list, but I did just want to throw it out as an honorable mention. Well, thank you guys for indulging me in this exercise. Michael, Morgan, where can people find Ben and Lacy?
Ben and Lacy is available completely for free right now on Tubi. Believe it's also, if you don't want an ad, I think it's also available for purchase on Amazon Prime Video. Yeah, check it out. Ben, thanks so much for having us.
thank you,
Thank
Ben.
you guys so much for joining me. I'll have links to that on my YouTube description, my podcast description. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this discussion on Gen Z. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. My name's Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse Movie Channel. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.